and welcome to the deep dive. We've got a fantastic stack of sources today, all centered around something, well, incredibly practical and interesting for so many of you. Mastering English communication and boosting your learning journey.
That's right. And we're not just talking basic grammar rules here.
No, definitely not. We're getting into the real stuff, how native speakers actually talk, how to make those conversations flow naturally.
And the smartest ways to build your skills, maybe beyond just the textbook methods.
Exactly. The material we've been digging into, it spans a really wide spectrum.
It really does. It goes from the absolute fundamentals, like how do you even start a conversation and keep it going?
Right.
All the way to more nuanced vocabulary for specific situations, different learning approaches that actually seem to work, and even some really fun insights into things like slang, regional differences, and those little phrases, that just make you sound more fluent.
It's genuinely a goldmine. So our mission in this deep dive, tailored specifically for you based on all this great material, is to take all these fascinating threads and weave together the most important nuggets of knowledge, the truly surprising facts that might make you think a bit differently, and the really actionable tips you can start using, like today. The goal is simple: help you feel more confident, more informed, and, well, more connected in your English conversations and studies.
Sounds good.
Okay, let's unpack this and dive right into some core strategies that the sources highlighted as making a real difference basically the moment you start talking to someone.
Absolutely. And one of the very first, and you could argue maybe the most fundamental points raised, is this distinction between simply responding to someone and actively engaging with them. It's about moving beyond seeing conversation as just a Q&A where you provide the correct answer, and instead seeing it as like a dynamic interaction where you're a real participant, not just responding.
And the prime example the sources jump on almost immediately is that classic exchange. How are you?
Oh, yeah.
Leading to the classic, I'm fine, thank you, and you. Now, on the surface, that seems totally correct, right?
Grammatically, it's perfect. No issues there.
But the material suggests that while it's sound, using only that exact phrase, repeated identically every single time, well, it can sometimes inadvertently signal a more basic level of English proficiency.
That's the key insight here, really. Think about it from a native speaker's perspective for a second.
Okay.
They've probably said, I'm fine, thank you, and you. Thousands, maybe tens of thousands of times. It becomes almost automatic for them.
Right, like muscle memory.
Exactly. Something they might not even consciously think about when they say it quickly. So when they hear a non-native speaker use that exact phrasing, maybe with the same intonation every time, it can sound, well, one source used the word robotic, because it lacks that natural variation a native speaker would just use without thinking.
Right. And okay, so what happens when a native speaker gets that kind of robotic signal? What's the consequence?
Well, it can lead to unconscious assumptions about your English level. They might just assume you're only comfortable with very basic exchanges.
Even if you're not.
Exactly. Even if you're ready to talk about complex topics. And this assumption could then lead them, consciously or unconsciously, to maybe talk slower, use simpler vocabulary, or perhaps even try to wrap up the conversation sooner because they anticipate it won't go beyond that initial polite greeting.
So you might be ready for a deep discussion about, I don't know, quantum physics.
Yeah, exactly.
But if your opening sounds too formulaic, you might never get the chance to actually have that conversation.
Precisely. It sets an expectation, potentially a limiting one.
So the alternative isn't about being rude or incorrect. It's just mix it up. Use different natural phrases that native speakers actually use day to day.
That's exactly it. The material suggests really simple, common alternatives. Instead of always sticking to, I'm fine, thank you, and you could try, I'm good, how about you?
Okay.
Or just, I'm okay, or not bad. Even a simple good you works in a lot of casual contexts.
And the real value isn't just using a different phrase, it's the signal it sends.
Yes, that's the core idea. Using phrases a native speaker would naturally reach for acts as a kind of subtle signal, a clue to the other person.
A clue that you're comfortable with more natural language.
Exactly. And potentially ready for a conversation that goes beyond the most basic pleasantries. It can instantly change their perception and maybe their willingness to engage more deeply.
That's such a smart, practical tip. It's a small change, right? But the potential impact on how the conversation unfolds seems huge.
It really can be.
And the sources take this a step further. They suggest that sometimes, maybe surprisingly, you might even try using a big word or just like a slang word relatively early on.
Yes, this was an interesting tactic mentioned. The idea here is strategic. It's not about showing off or anything.
Okay.
It's more about making an immediate positive impression.
Yeah.
Using a slightly more advanced vocabulary word correctly, or deploying a piece of common slang appropriately for the context. It signals that you have a broader command of the language, and you're comfortable using it in a less rigid, less textbook sort of way.
So it directly counters that potential robotic impression we were just talking about.
Exactly. It suggests personality.
Yeah.
It suggests knowledge beyond the absolute basics. It can make the native speaker think, oh, okay, this person isn't just reciting phrases they memorized. They understand nuance. Maybe they have interesting ideas.
And that shift in their expectation can open the door to a much richer exchange right from the start.
Precisely. It shows you're an active, dynamic communicator, not just a responder.
Okay, so moving on from that initial greeting, a really key strategy, and one the sources mention is surprisingly easy to overlook, especially if you're feeling a bit nervous, is simply asking the other person a question. Oh, absolutely crucial.
Don't just be the one answering all the time. Be the one who inquires too.
This is fundamental for creating a balanced, engaging conversation. When you ask questions, you shift the dynamic. You go from being purely reactive to being proactive.
Right.
It shows genuine interest in the other person's thoughts, their experiences, their life,
Yeah.
which is, inherently flattering and encourages them to open up.
And it takes some of the pressure off you, doesn't it?
Definitely. It takes some of the cognitive load off. You don't have to constantly be figuring out what you need to say next if the other person is talking because you ask them something interesting.
But the sources aren't just saying ask any old question. They really emphasize asking deep, open-ended questions.
That distinction is vital.
Yeah.
The material draws a really clear line between questions that tend to shut down conversation.
Like yes/no questions.
Exactly. Those yes/no questions like, do you like cheese? The conversation often just stops right there. The answer is yes or no, and then you're left scrambling thinking, okay, what do I ask now? Definitely been there. It's awkward.
It is. It leaves you stuck. But an open-ended question, that's an invitation. Something like, what do you think about cheese? What's your favorite kind?
Okay.
That can lead to a whole discussion. Different types of cheese, where they first tried it, memories associated with it, why they like certain kinds. The other person has space to elaborate, share details, give you more information.
Which gives you so much more material to work with.
Exactly. You can comment on their answer, ask a follow-up question about something specific they mentioned related to your own experience. The conversation doesn't just halt, it can genuinely snowball, as one source put it. It builds on itself.
The sources also give some great examples for transitioning into questions or introducing topics smoothly. Using a casual word like anyway was one.
Yeah, anyway is incredibly common and useful for that. After maybe a brief initial exchange about the weather or something, you could just naturally pivot. Okay, well anyway, up to anything fun this weekend.
Feels totally normal.
Completely normal. It just moves you into a standard relatable topic.
Here.
Another excellent structure they mentioned is asking if they saw or heard about something specific.
Like, hey, did you see or hear about that new movie? Or maybe, did you hear about what happened with Sarah?
Precisely. The blah, blah, blah part can be anything topical, current events, something funny you saw online, news about a mutual friend. And the beauty of this structure is kind of twofold.
Okay.
Firstly, it gives the other person an easy out if they haven't seen or heard about it, or if they just don't feel like discussing it. They can simply say, oh yeah, I think I heard something about that, and you can read the room and move on. No pressure.
Got it. And secondly,
if they are interested, it gives them a perfect platform to jump in, share their thoughts, reactions, maybe more information they have. It lets them drive the conversation forward.
so it's a way to suggest a topic, but you let them control the level of engagement. It helps you stay within people's comfort zone, as the material put it.
Exactly that. You're providing a hook, but you're not demanding they take the bait. It's respectful, and it keeps the interaction feeling natural and low pressure.
And then a crucial piece of this, but one that's apparently often forgotten, is remembering to circle back. The sources explicitly remind us, keep returning it.
Yes.
So important. After you've asked a question they've answered, it's easy to get caught up in your own reaction or your own related story. But you have to remember to bring the focus back to them. Ask, what about you?
That simple phrase, what about you, is just essential for maintaining that balanced two-way street in a conversation.
Yeah.
You've shown interest by asking, you've listened to their response, maybe shared a brief related thought.
Right.
But then you need to explicitly invite them to share their perspective on the same topic or ask you the same question back. It prevents the conversation from becoming, an interrogation where you're just firing questions or a monologue where you just talk about yourself.
It reinforces that it's a mutual exchange.
Exactly. It's incredibly common to forget this step when you're still building fluency, maybe focusing hard on just understanding and responding. But native speakers do it almost automatically. It's part of the rhythm.
Absolutely. Okay, let's shift gears slightly. Compliments came up in the sources as another strategy, a way to build rapport, show appreciation.
Yeah, nice little tool so as you're enjoying the person's company. Maybe makes them more receptive to chatting longer.
And the examples were pretty straightforward.
Very simple. Sincere compliments are often the most effective. Things like, "Oh, I like your shirt today," or "That's a really nice dress," or "Noticing a change. Did you get a new haircut? It looks good on you." They focus on specific, observable things.
But the sources added some really important warnings or caveats, which is helpful. Complimenting a total stranger needs care.
Definitely. Context and appropriateness are absolutely key here. Complimenting someone's eyes or their body shape, for instance, especially from a stranger, that would likely feel pretty uncomfortable, maybe even inappropriate. However, a compliment on something they chose to wear or express themselves with, like, say, a band t-shirt or a unique piece of jewelry, that can be a fantastic conversation starter.
Especially if it reveals a shared interest.
Exactly. "Cool band shirt. Have you seen them live?" That opens the door very differently than just a comment on general appearance.
And maybe the most important warning was about sincerity.
Oh, absolutely paramount. The sources really hammered this point home. Honesty and sincerity matter hugely. An automatic insincere compliment just feels hollow. You can usually tell when someone's just saying something nice out of obligation.
Like that automatic "you too" when someone compliments your outfit, even if you don't actually like theirs.
Exactly that. That doesn't build any real connection. It feels forced.
So what's the suggested approach for returning a compliment genuinely if you don't immediately have one?
The advice is simple but effective. Don't feel pressured to return it instantly if nothing genuine comes to mind. Just acknowledge their compliment gratefully. Say thank you, where that's nice of you to say. Then, make a little mental note. Later in the conversation, try to find something you genuinely like or appreciate about them. Maybe something they said, or an aspect of their personality, or yes, maybe something else they're wearing, and then offer a sincere compliment about that.
So it feels more authentic because it's specific and timed naturally.
Precisely. It carries much more weight when it feels considered and real.
Okay. Building on that idea of making connections, the sources also recommend not being afraid to open up. This can feel a bit vulnerable, right? Especially in a language you're still learning, but it's highlighted as beneficial.
Yeah, open up here doesn't mean you have to spill your deepest secrets or anything.
Right, okay.
In this context, it just means sharing something about yourself. The purpose is to ingratiate yourself, basically. Make yourself more relatable. Help the other person understand you on a slightly more personal level than just discussing, say, the news. It builds that connection.
So the examples aren't necessarily heavy or dramatic.
Not at all. The sources give really simple, low-stakes examples. Things like sharing what you did last weekend, or what you're planning for the upcoming weekend. Maybe mentioning a project you're working on that you're excited about, or even just busy with.
Just everyday parts of life.
Exactly. Things that reveal a little bit about who you are, what you do, maybe what you value, without being overly personal.
And the benefit is that it often encourages the other person to do the same, to share something back.
Precisely.
Yeah.
That's a social dynamic. If you're willing to share something about yourself within appropriate boundaries, of course.
Yes. The sources definitely cautioned about that.
They did. The advice was clear. Don't be a creep, don't be weird, don't be strange. Always use your judgment about what's appropriate for the situation and your relationship with the person.
Okay.
But assuming you stay within those reasonable comfort zones, when you share a little, people are often much more comfortable sharing something about themselves in return.
And that moves the conversation beyond just superficial small talk.
Exactly. It elevates it beyond just, the weather or the traffic. It allows for more meaningful human connection. It's identified as a really good way to actually meet people and start building friendships, even if it feels a bit challenging or uncomfortable at first.
Yeah.
It pushes you outside that safe, predictable zone.
Okay, so those are some really insightful strategies for just having better conversations right from the start. Now, let's transition to the wealth of material the sources provided on actually improving your English skills over the long haul. This moves beyond the immediate interaction tactics to more practical learning techniques.
Exactly. These methods that were outlined often go beyond the traditional classroom or textbook approach. They seem to focus heavily on active engagement with the language and finding ways to integrate English into your daily life in practical, consistent ways.
The fundamental idea mentioned is that direct engagement with the language and native content is key, which includes things we probably already think of,
Right.
like finding English speakers to talk with, watching movies, listening to music, reading English newspapers or magazines, that kind of thing.
Those are definitely foundational pillars. But the sources get more specific about how you can use this content for active speaking practice, not just passive consumption.
Okay, like what?
Well, one technique mentioned is called shadowing. This involves listening to some audio or video, maybe it's a formal lesson, a speech, or even just a scene from a TV show. And you immediately try to repeat exactly what you hear. You're mimicking the pronunciation, the intonation, the rhythm as closely as you possibly can, like being their vocal shadow.
Wow, that sounds really challenging, but I can see how it would help with pronunciation.
It is. It definitely trains your mouth and your vocal cords to produce sounds and patterns that might feel unfamiliar or difficult in English. Another technique, perhaps slightly less intense, is simply reading out loud.
Just taking a text and reading it.
Yeah. If you have transcripts for audio or video material, great. Or even just a book, an article, anything really, read it aloud. This gets your mouth physically used to forming the English words and phrases. It builds fluency through repetition.
The sources also brought up a technique I found really interesting: speeding up your reading over time. Practicing reading faster and faster. Why would you do that?
The core reasoning behind that is that true fluency isn't just about knowing the words. It's about being able to produce them quickly and smoothly. Ideally, without having to consciously translate or construct every single sentence in your head first.
Right, that automaticity.
Exactly. Being able to read quickly out loud pushes you towards that. The advice is to take maybe a sentence or a short paragraph. Read it slowly and carefully. First, make sure you understand it.
Okay.
Then reread it multiple times, each time trying to go just a little bit faster. Keep practicing until you can read it at something closer to a native speaker's natural conversational pace.
Ah, so it's training the muscle memory and that brain connection, trying to bypass the internal translation step. That makes a lot of sense.
Precisely.
And getting feedback is essential for all these techniques, isn't it? You need to know if you're actually improving or just practicing mistakes.
Absolutely crucial. The sources mentioned a couple of key ways to get it. If you have access to a teacher, obviously getting their feedback on your speaking, maybe by submitting recordings or practicing live in lessons, that's invaluable.
Okay. And if you don't have a teacher readily available?
For self-practice, the recommendation is to record your own voice. Use those shadowing or reading aloud techniques, record yourself, and then compare your recording side by side with the original native speaker's audio. Listening back objectively, really critically, can reveal subtle differences in pronunciation or stress patterns or rhythm that you might completely miss while you're focused on just speaking.
That takes some bravery, listening to your own voice. But I can see the value. Okay, but what if you can't just pack up and move to an English-speaking country for that full immersion experience? The sources suggest you can actually create immersion right where you are.
Absolutely. This concept is really powerful. You essentially create a situation or an environment where you can't easily escape back into your native language. You force yourself to rely on English.
How does that work in practice?
Well, the material included a great anecdote about someone learning Japanese. They joined a hobby group, maybe a craft or something, where everyone else only spoke Japanese.
Ah, okay.
So there was this immense motivation to use Japanese because that was literally the only way to participate, to connect with people, to understand what was going on, and to continue enjoying the hobby. It created a need.
So how can you apply that same principle without moving abroad or finding a very specific hobby group like that?
You can replicate that forced use environment in your own space. The sources suggest dedicating a specific time and maybe a specific place. Perhaps your room for an hour every evening.
Or even a whole day.
Or even trying to commit to a whole day just using English in your house, especially if you live alone or maybe with family or roommates who are supportive. And in that dedicated space or time, you make a firm rule.
Yeah.
Only English allowed.
Wow, that sounds intense, but I bet it's effective.
It really is. because it immediately forces you to rely only on the English you know, and you'll very quickly discover all the everyday words and phrases you don't know.
Because you need them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You'll need to talk about the things around you, your simple actions, ask questions about them. It shines a spotlight on the vocabulary gaps related to your actual, real life, not just abstract textbook topics.
And doing it in a private space probably makes it feel safer to make mistakes.
That's a huge part of it. Feeling comfortable making mistakes, knowing you won't be judged, is vital for pushing yourself and actually learning.
That vulnerability piece again. Okay, another really common challenge for learners is that habit of thinking in their native language first and then mentally translating before speaking or writing. How do the sources suggest breaking that habit?
This is a fundamental shift in how your brain processes the language. It takes conscious effort. One method recommended is to try and bypass that native language step entirely. By identifying objects around you in English directly. You see a table, you think the word table. You see a window, think window. Don't think the word in your native language first.
Okay.
You're training your brain to associate the English word directly with the concept or the object itself, rather than routing it through your native language equivalent. Just try doing this consciously throughout your day. Look around, name things in English in your head.
So you're building direct connections in your brain, cutting out the middleman.
Exactly. You're creating those direct pathways. And building on this, a really powerful tip for the material, something I personally found very useful in my own language learning, is to study phrases and sentences, not just single vocabulary words in isolation.
Why is studying phrases so much more useful than just memorizing lists of words?
Because phrases show you a word in action. They demonstrate how a word is actually used in context. And that is crucial for understanding its full meaning, its nuances, its connotations.
Can you give an example?
Sure. The sources use the word crazy. If you just look up crazy in a dictionary, you might get a primary definition related to, mental confusion or illness.
Right.
But if you study phrases like, are you crazy? Meaning, are you out of your mind? Or, that movie was crazy good, meaning surprisingly excellent. Or, the traffic was crazy bad, meaning extremely terrible.
You see, it's used as an intensifier too.
Exactly. You see, it can mean something really good or really bad, depending entirely on the phrase and the context. Studying the usage, the phrase itself, gives you so much more information than just the single word definition. It shows you the subtle ways meaning can shift.
So you learn chunks of language that native speakers actually use. Makes your own speech sound more natural too, I bet.
Definitely. You start thinking in phrases, not just translating word by word.
And when you do encounter new words you need to look up, the sources recommend using a specific kind of tool, a learner's dictionary.
Yes, this is a really valuable resource. A learner's dictionary is designed specifically for language students. The key difference is that it provides simplified explanations of words using simple English.
Instead of complex dictionary jargon or forcing you to translate?
Exactly. It keeps you thinking in English. And crucially, they often include lots of example sentences showing the word in various common contexts. This reinforces understanding and usage.
So you're staying with the English ecosystem, so to speak, even when you're looking up a word.
That's the idea. It reinforces that direct association we talked about earlier. Merriam-Webster was mentioned as an excellent resource that has a fantastic learner's dictionary available online. Using this type of dictionary consistently helps you start thinking in English because you're understanding definitions and examples through the lens of the language you're trying to master.
Okay, beyond that kind of dedicated practice, the sources really emphasize integrating English into your daily routine, making it part of your life, not just something you do during a designated study time.
This is all about finding those natural, low-pressure opportunities to use the language throughout your day. The main suggestion is to try and do your daily activities in English, at least mentally, where possible.
What does that look like? Just narrating your day in your head?
Pretty much. As you're doing things, think about the English verbs and vocabulary for those actions.
Like as I'm pouring my coffee, I think I'm pouring coffee.
Exactly. Or I'm making breakfast, I'm getting dressed, I'm walking to the train station, I'm washing the dishes. It seems incredibly simple, maybe even a bit silly at first.
But what's the benefit?
The benefit is it immediately highlights gaps in your practical everyday vocabulary. You might think, okay, I'm stirring the soup. Wait, what's the word for the thing I'm using? Oh yeah, a spoon. And the action, stirring. Okay, what if I'm cutting vegetables with a knife? Chop.
It's a really natural way to discover the words you actually need for the things you do every single day.
Exactly. You start finding those missing everyday words that are absolutely crucial for functional fluency, but they might not appear prominently in, say, chapter 3 of your beginner textbook. And it just keeps the language active in your mind throughout the day.
Building on this, a more specific practice tip mentioned was to train responses to common questions.
Yes, this links back to our earlier point about greetings.
Right, like the how are you type questions.
Exactly. Or what do you do? Or where are you from? Or maybe what did you do this weekend? Questions like these are incredibly common. You hear them all the time in everyday conversation.
And if it takes you ages to answer.
Right. If it takes you a long time to formulate an answer, if you're stumbling or clearly translating in your head, it's a strong indicator that you need more automaticity with those basic responses.
So the advice is basically to have a few standard answers ready and practice them until they just come out without thinking.
Yes. Have maybe 2 or 3 default responses ready for how are you? I'm good, I'm okay, not bad, whatever feels natural to you. Practice saying them quickly, smoothly. Do the same for other common questions that are relevant to your life.
What's the goal?
The goal is that when you hear that common question, the English response just pops out automatically. You don't have to consciously process it each time. This saves valuable mental energy in a real conversation.
Yeah, freeing you up to focus on the more complex parts.
Exactly. It makes you sound much more natural, helps the conversation flow better, and honestly, it reduces your own stress because you're not caught off guard by questions you hear multiple times a day.
That feels very practical, very actionable.
Okay, we briefly touched on watching movies and TV earlier, but the sources gave some more strategic tips for how to actually use media effectively for learning.
Right, it's not just about passively watching. The primary recommendation is to try watching TV shows and movies without subtitles in your native language.
Why is it so important? Subtitles help understanding, don't they?
They help understand the plot, yes. But the problem is, native language subtitles train your brain to read your own language, not to listen actively to the English being spoken. You might feel like you're learning English, but often you're mostly just reading. Your focus goes to the text.
Right. Your eyes just follow your native language. Makes sense.
So an alternative, or maybe a next step up, is to watch with closed captioning turned on. But, and this is crucial, the captions should be in the target language. So English captions for English audio. Okay, how does having English captions help compared to having no captions at all?
Seeing the English words as they are spoken helps bridge that gap between the sound and the written form. You might hear a word or a phrase that's mumbled or spoken quickly or just hard to distinguish, but seeing it written out clarifies it instantly. It helps you associate the sound you're hearing with the visual word. This aids both your listening comprehension and your vocabulary acquisition because you're seeing words used in context.
And you can always pause and look up difficult words if you need to.
Exactly. But the immediate practice is in connecting the spoken English to the written English in real time.
And the sources also recommended being strategic about what media you choose, right? Not just jumping into anything.
Yes, absolutely. Select media that's appropriate for your current level. Think about the vocabulary used: highly technical, very slangy, or more standard. Consider the intended audience often. Children's shows use simpler vocabulary and maybe slightly slower speech, which can be a good starting point.
And the speed of the dialogue itself.
Definitely. Gauge the speed. Don't try to jump straight into a super fast-paced legal drama or a complex philosophical documentary if you're just starting out with media practice. Begin with something more manageable. Build your confidence and then gradually challenge yourself more.
Okay, this next tip from the sources sounds, well, a bit counterintuitive, especially for learners who really rely on them. They suggest not bringing a dictionary to your lesson, particularly if it's a conversation practice session.
Yeah, this one feels strange at first glance, doesn't it? But the reasoning is very practical, and it's tied directly to real-world communication dynamics.
What's the problem with using a dictionary in class?
The core problem is that stopping a conversation dead in its tracks to pull out your phone, type in a word, wait for the definition, it completely kills the flow. It shatters the natural back-and-forth rhythm of a real chat. The sources use the example of being at a bank counter, or ordering coffee, or having a quick chat with a neighbor. You can't realistically stop everything and say, hang on, just got to look this word up for every single unknown word. It's just not how natural interaction works.
So using a dictionary in class trains you in a habit that isn't actually sustainable in most real-life situations.
Exactly. It builds a reliance that doesn't translate well.
So if you're in a conversation, maybe with a teacher or a language partner, and you encounter a word you don't know or you just can't remember, what's the alternative strategy? What should you do instead?
The sources offer two main alternatives, both of which are actually great practice in themselves. First, try to describe the word you want to use.
Describe it, like play charades.
Maybe sometimes gestures help, but mostly it means using the English words you do know to explain the concept or the thing you're trying to talk about. Examples from the material included saying things like, oh, what's the word that means? When something is really surprising, or it's this thing that, you use it to cook soup in. You describe the function or appearance or meaning.
That forces you to use your existing vocabulary creatively. I like that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's fantastic practice for your descriptive skills and for what's called circumlocution, basically. Talking around a word when you don't know the specific term. It pushes you to actively use the English you already have, rather than just stopping.
And the second alternative?
Simply ask your conversation partner for the word. How do you say? Or what's the word for? And the sources make another really important point here. When someone teaches you a word in the context of a conversation, when you needed it, you tend to remember it much, much better than if you just look it up passively in isolation later. It gets linked to that specific moment, that interaction, the person who helped you. It sticks better.
Those are brilliant, really practical learning techniques. Okay, let's shift gears now to the specific vocabulary and phrase lists that the sources included. This is where we really start building our practical toolkit for navigating different situations and adding, precision and color to our language.
Yeah, this section really highlights the richness and the sheer variety of English. These lists give us insight into how language changes based on the context, from quite formal reporting verbs to very casual slang, and they provide specific vocabulary for different domains of life, things you might actually want to talk about.
Starting with verbs for reporting what someone said, the sources showed these aren't just interchangeable, right? They have different flavors or nuances.
Exactly. They're not all the same. We have the core verbs. Say is generally the most neutral option, just report speech. Tell usually implies information passing from one person to another, often something specific or new, like she told me where the station was, or my boss told me I got the promotion. There's a recipient implied. Speak is often a bit more formal and tends to focus on the act of talking itself or discussing a specific, perhaps serious topic. I spoke to my professor about the assignment, or he speaks 3 languages. Talk usually implies a more interactive, two-way conversation about a topic. We talked about our weekend plans, and it commonly needs prepositions like talk to someone or talk with someone about something.
Got it. And then the sources brought up those very casual but incredibly common American English expressions for reporting speech, was like and was all.
Oh yeah, these are absolutely ubiquitous in informal spoken American English. They're used constantly to quickly report what someone said or even just their reaction or their thought process, often in a slightly dramatic or emotional way.
So you hear them a lot in stories people tell.
Constantly. And often delivered very rapidly. And then he was like, seriously? Or I opened the door and she was all, where have you been? You hear that rhythm.
Is there a difference between was like and was all?
Was like is probably the most common, really flexible, applicable in tons of situations. He was like, let's go. Was all often adds a little bit more emphasis or maybe conveys the strong emotion behind the statement more clearly. She was all crying or he was all defensive. It captures the feeling or the manner of the speech, maybe better than just a neutral he said or she said.
So while they're definitely informal, understanding and just recognizing them is key to comprehending a lot of natural native conversation. And they contrast really sharply with the more formal ways of reporting information, right?
Oh, completely different world. Compare those casual forms to according to and report. According to in a bit is used specifically when you're citing a source for your information, often an official or authoritative source, like a news article, a study, a police report, an eyewitness account, according to the latest research, according to witnesses.
Very specific.
Yes. And report is used in more formal contexts for officially communicating information, maybe submitting documents, giving updates to a superior. You must report the incident to the authorities, or he reported back to his supervisor on the project's progress. These are all about the source, the formality, the official nature of the information, not conversational storytelling.
Okay, that makes sense. The sources also gave us some great, really practical phrases for specific everyday places. Restaurants came up first.
Yeah, these kinds of lists are incredibly useful for just navigating common social situations without feeling awkward. For restaurants, we saw the basic entry phrases, like, a table for two, please. Or asking for the menu. Could I please see a menu?
And ordering itself?
Right. I'd like to try this dish, or and importantly, modifying your order. Could you leave out the onions? Or can I get that without cheese? Being able to customize is key sometimes.
What about getting things on the table or the waiter's attention?
Asking for things on the table. Could you pass the salt, please? Getting the waiter's attention politely is crucial. Excuse me is the standard way. Much, much preferred over shouting, waiter, or snapping fingers.
Definitely. And at the end of the meal,
practical requests come up then. Asking for separate bills is very common, especially in the US. Can we get separate checks, please? Inquiring about dishes maybe not listed on the menu. Are there any specials today? And of course, the essential step of getting the bill. Could we have the bill, please? Or can I get the check, please? Check is more common in American English, bill perhaps more British, but both are understood.
Got it. And then a completely different but equally practical set of vocabulary emerged when talking about bars.
Ha! Yes. Bars definitely have their own specific lexicon, their own language almost. We saw terms like to buy a round. That means buying one drink for everyone in your group at the same time. A common social custom.
Okay. And how drinks are served.
Understanding those terms is important so you get what you want. On the rocks means served with ice. Straight up means the drink, usually a cocktail, is chilled with ice, but then strained and served without the ice in the glass. And neat means the spirit, like whiskey, is served completely plain, not chilled, no ice.
Okay, rocks, straight up, neat. Got it. What about beer?
For beer, common sizes mentioned were a pint, a standard large glass, or a half pint, smaller. And the term chaser came up. That's usually a non-alcoholic drink like water or soda that you might drink right after taking a shot of strong alcohol to kind of wash down the taste or lessen the burn.
And describing how you feel after maybe having a few drinks.
Yes, the gradient of inebriation. The sources distinguish between to be tipsy, which is that milder stage, you're feeling the effects a little, maybe a bit unsteady, perhaps more talkative or giggly.
Right.
Versus to be drunk, which implies significant impairment, usually has more negative connotations, being loud, clumsy, incoherent, maybe making poor decisions. It's generally not seen as a positive state.
And ending the night?
The common phrase is to call it a night. That means you've decided you're done drinking or socializing for the evening and you're going home. And the unpleasant consequence the next morning if you overdid it is a hangover. So this whole list gives you the language to function, order, and talk about the experience in that specific bar environment.
Moving to even more fundamental building blocks, the sources provided a really wide spectrum of ways to say hello and handle those basic polite interactions.
Yeah, this really shows the range in English from quite formal to extremely casual greetings. You've got your formal options, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and the universally polite and always safe choices. Hello and hi.
And then the casual end.
Loads of casual options. Hey is incredibly common, very standard informal greeting, what's up? Or the even shorter sup is very informal, mostly used between friends, and it means, what are you doing? Or what's new? Not literally what is above you.
Important distinction.
Absolutely. Though people might joke and say the ceiling in response, yo is also very informal, maybe associated with certain subcultures. And howdy was mentioned, but it's important to know that's quite culturally specific, strongly associated with the American South and West. You wouldn't hear it much in, say, New York or London.
Good context. What about seeing someone after a while?
For people you haven't seen recently, long time no see is a very natural, common phrase. And asking how have you been is standard follow-up. Beyond just greetings, the list included those essential politeness phrases we use constantly.
Like,
please,
toast,
thank you, and the common response is to thank you like you're welcome. Or the more casual alternatives like no problem, sure thing, or even no biggie.
And basic agreement and questions.
Right. Yes, no, along with all the casual variations like yep, nah, nope, The word okay is incredibly versatile. Its origin story is apparently a humorous misspelling, all correct. That's what one source claimed. But now it's used constantly for agreement. Okay, sounds good. Acknowledgement, okay, I understand. Or even as a transition marker. Okay, so next we need to discuss.
It does a lot of work.
It really does. Excuse me. Is vital used for getting a stranger's attention politely? Excuse me, could you tell me the time? Or for apologizing for a minor infraction, like bumping into someone. Excuse me. I'm sorry, is for more significant apologies.
Functional questions.
Essential functional questions like, what time is it?
Yep.
Or where is it? And remembering the nuance with the, you drop it for cities, countries, states, where is Mexico?
Yeah.
But you generally keep it for specific places like the bank, the post office, the restroom. Polite requests like, may I use the restroom? Or this slightly more common, can I go to the bathroom? Are standard. Ordering food again, I would like to order. Or just, I'd like. And asking for the bill check. Can I get the check bill, please?
Saying goodbye.
Common ways to say goodbye when you expect to see the person again soon include see you soon, see you later, or just later. And the word really was highlighted as interesting because its meaning changes so much with intonation. Upward inflection really shows surprise or interest. Downward inflection, oh really, often shows mild surprise, perhaps skepticism, or even lack of interest.
Wow, yeah, just that basic list covers so much essential ground for daily interaction. And then the sources dove into specific vocabulary for completely different domains like beauty and skincare, personal hygiene, outer space, and sleep. This really illustrates how language gets specialized.
These lists are perfect examples of how your vocabulary needs to expand into the areas that are actually relevant to your interests or your daily life. You're probably not going to use the word supernova when ordering in a restaurant.
Hopefully not.
And you're unlikely to need bronzer in a serious discussion about galactic clusters. The language fits the topic.
So quickly, what were some key terms from those lists? Beauty, skincare.
We saw the general term makeup, then specific items like foundation, that base layer, blush for adding color to cheeks, mimicking blushing, bronzer for creating a tanned look or for contouring shadows. Also terms for skin issues. Acne is a general condition, self-accountable, and then individual spot called pimples, or the more informal zits, which maybe implies a bigger or more painful one. And face wash, the specific cleanser for your face.
Hygiene, actions and products.
Actions included to wash hands, to shower or take a bath, to brush teeth, to style hair, to shave. Key products mentioned were soap or cleanser, the important distinction between deodorant, which fights odor, and antiperspirant, which fights sweat, noting they are very often combined in one product. Also mouthwash, toothpaste, and the common hair care pair, shampoo and conditioner.
Space vocabulary sounded fascinating.
It is. Fundamental terms first. Planet, star, solar system, galaxy. Then more specific objects like the crucial difference between a comet, which is icy and develops a tail of gas and dust when near the sun, versus a meteor, which is a piece of rock or debris burning up in the atmosphere, a shooting star, versus a meteorite, which is a rock if it survives the fall and actually hits the Earth's surface. That distinction, meteor in the air, meteorite on the ground, is key.
Okay, got it. Any space events?
Events like a supernova, a massive star exploding at the end of its life, and the mysterious black hole, an area with such intense gravity that nothing, not even light, can escape. And of course, our own home planet, Earth, which, interestingly, can be a tricky word for some learners to pronounce correctly, that D sound.
And finally, sleep vocabulary covered the whole process.
Pretty much. Actions like to wake up, regaining consciousness, to get up, or get out of bed, physically leaving the bed. To snooze has two common meanings. Hitting the snooze button on your alarm to get a few more minutes of sleep, or just taking a short, light sleep, similar to a nap.
And oversleep.
Importantly, to oversleep doesn't just mean sleeping late. It specifically means sleeping past the time you intended to wake up, often causing you to be late for something. A nap is a short, planned period of sleep, usually during the day. Experiences while sleeping include a dream, neutral or positive, or a nightmare, a bad or scary dream. Preparing for sleep is to go to bed, with very common informal slang options like to hit the hay or to hit the sack. And the process of actually drifting off is to fall asleep.
These lists are just so valuable because they equip you to talk about things you actually do every day or things you might be genuinely interested in, like astronomy. Having this specific language makes you sound so much more fluent and confident when discussing those particular topics.
Absolutely. It really reinforces that vocabulary learning shouldn't just be about random word lists. It's most effective when it's targeted language acquisition for the topics and situations that are actually relevant to your life and interests.
Speaking of relevant conversations, the sources didn't shy away from covering a very common aspect of many chats: gossip. They actually gave specific phrases that often signal you're about to share something a bit juicy or confidential.
Yeah, these are like conversational cues or openers for gossip. Phrases like starting with an emphatic, "Oh my God, so," which immediately signals something surprising or significant is coming.
Right, perks your ears up.
Exactly. Others include, "You won't believe what happened to me the other day," or the classic direct, "Guess what?" Also, I haven't told you about this yet, suggesting exclusivity or posing it as a question. Have you heard about person or event?
Casual starters, too.
Yeah, casual conversational lead-ins like, so the other day, or so talking with someone, and no.
Yeah.
And the phrase I have to tell you about was highlighted as particularly effective because that have to implies it's really important, exciting, or maybe even a bit scandalous. It creates anticipation.
And they also pointed out a subtle nuance in the phrase, what's up with?
That's a great observation. What's up with isn't usually just a neutral question like, how is X? It generally implies that you're asking about X because there seems to be a problem or something is off or something strange is happening with them or it.
Like, what's up with Steve? He seems really quiet today.
Exactly. Or what's up with the internet? It's being so slow. It implies there's some issue or concern or deviation from the norm that you're noticing and asking about. A slightly negative or worried connotation often.
The sources also had a funny section highlighting words that Americans in particular tend to overuse.
Yes, this was amusing but also insightful. These are words that often lose a bit of their impact simply because they appear so frequently in casual speech. The list included. Definitely. Literally. Hilarious. Seriously.
Literally is a big one.
Literally is particularly interesting because it's so often used for emphasis when the situation is clearly not literal. I was literally starving when they were just very hungry, or my head literally exploded when they were just shocked. It's become an intensifier more than a marker of fact.
And
like, of course, is famous as a quintessential filler word. It sometimes gets inserted almost unconsciously when someone is pausing to think, searching for the next word, or maybe hedging a statement. Recognizing these overused words can help you understand the rhythm and habits of native speech, even if you consciously choose not to overuse them quite so much yourself.
They also touched briefly on regional variations in pronunciation, which is just a good reminder that there's no single correct way to pronounce English words.
Right. It varies hugely. The examples given were pairs like creek, sometimes pronounced as crick, coyote with 2 syllables, versus coyote with 3, route rhyming with out versus root rhyming with boot.
Apricot, caramel.
Yeah, apricot versus apricot. And the classic caramel, 2 syllables versus caramel, 3 syllables. These just illustrate clearly how pronunciation can differ significantly depending on where the speaker is from, even within the same country like the US. It's really helpful for learners to be aware of these variations to avoid confusion and understand that diversity is normal.
And just like pronunciation varies, language itself evolves, so some phrases just start to sound dated or distinctly uncool.
Definitely. Language is always changing. The sources listed some examples of phrases that have largely fallen out of popular favor and now sound old-fashioned, using sweet to mean cool or good.
Or groovy.
Or groovy, yeah, very much associated with the 60s and 70s. The term going steady for being in an exclusive romantic relationship sounds quite dated now. That playful negation, not, tacked onto the end of a sentence, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
Feels very 90s. And using duh sarcastically to imply something is painfully obvious also sounds a bit juvenile or dated to many years now.
So understanding them helps with older media maybe, but you probably wouldn't use them yourself if you want to sound current.
Exactly. They mark you as being from a different era, linguistically speaking.
Finally, in this vocabulary section, they included some intermediate-level Latin phrases that have actually made their way into common English usage.
Yes, these often pop up in more educated or slightly more formal contexts, but they are relatively common. Phrases like bona fide, meaning genuine or real, a bona fide expert. Vice versa, meaning the opposite is also true. He respects her, and vice versa. Alma mater, referring to the university or college you graduated from.
Carpe diem.
Carpe diem, the famous seize the day. And status quo, meaning the existing state of affairs, the way things normally are. They wanted to maintain the status quo. Recognizing these adds another layer to understanding English, especially maybe in written texts or certain professional or academic discussions. Vice versa, for instance, is actually quite common in business contexts.
And to wrap up this whole vocabulary exploration, the sources finished with some really common idioms that help make your English sound much more natural and fluent.
Yes, idioms are often the key to sounding less like a textbook and more like a native speaker. They can be tricky because their meaning isn't always obvious just from the individual words, but they're used constantly. The ones highlighted were pretty useful ones.
Like about to?
About to, meaning you are on the verge of doing something, you're going to do it very soon. I'm about to leave for work. Or, it looks like it's about to rain.
By the way.
By the way, is used to introduce a related but slightly different topic into the conversation. It's like saying incidentally, "Oh, I saw John yesterday. By the way, did you hear he got that new job?" It's a smooth transition marker.
In a way.
In a way is used when you're acknowledging that something is true, but maybe only from a certain perspective, or that a statement is partially true but not the whole picture. It acknowledges complexity. In a way, the project was a success, but we went way over budget.
On the other hand,
is a very common transition phrase used to introduce a contrasting point or an opposite perspective. It functions very much like however or but. The city is exciting. On the other hand, it's very expensive.
And as a matter of fact,
basically means actually, or in reality, or really. It's often used to emphasize a point, correct a misunderstanding, or add surprising information. Sometimes it can sound a bit more formal. You think he's lazy? As a matter of fact, he worked all weekend. Mastering common idioms like these really does make your spoken English flow much more naturally.
Wow, what an absolutely incredible deep dive into English communication and learning. We've seriously pulled out so many practical strategies, tons of useful phrases for different situations, and some really fascinating nuances from all those sources you provided today.
It really did cover a vast landscape, didn't it? We went from, fundamental shifts in how you approach basic greetings and ask questions to make conversations more dynamic.
Right.
All the way through active learning techniques like creating your own immersion environment, strategic practice with vocabulary, using tools like learners' dictionaries, and focusing on phrases.
And using media effectively.
Exactly. And then diving into those specific language sets for restaurants, bars, hygiene, space, sleep. Plus, understanding subtleties like reporting verbs, gossip cues, and common idioms. There's truly so much here for anyone to explore and apply to their own English journey, whatever stage they might be at.
Absolutely. So think about your own English learning or the conversations you've had recently. Which of these strategies, or maybe which set of vocabulary, feels most relevant, most useful, or perhaps most challenging for you right now? Maybe it's really committing to practicing those open-ended questions to stop conversations from stalling. Or maybe it's making a conscious effort this week to just identify everyday objects around your house in English, or perhaps focusing specifically on those bar phrases if you know you've got a social event coming up.
The real power of these insights lies in actually trying them out in their application. Applying even just one or two of these techniques consistently can make a significant impact on your confidence, help your English sound more natural, and genuinely accelerate your learning progress. Keep experimenting, keep practicing, and most importantly, keep seeking out those real-world opportunities to actually use English in situations that matter to you. That's truly where the fluency develops in the doing.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, here's a final thought for you, our listener, to carry forward and maybe mull over this week. Considering everything we've covered today, from the subtle signals sent by "I'm fine, thank you, and you," to the specific language needed to talk about skincare or black holes, what's the single smallest, most manageable change you could realistically make to your English practice or your approach to conversations this week? Something small that would help you feel just a little more confident, maybe sound a little more natural, and take just one concrete step closer towards your own communication goals.
That's a great question to ponder. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into these fascinating sources on English learning and communication.
It's been great. Until next time, keep learning, keep practicing, and keep diving deep.